Hey everyone, this is Ty here at V-Squirrel Studios, and today we're talking the very first Star Wars standalone film, Rogue One. Now throughout this video, we're going to be showcasing some of the differences that we saw between the three primary pre-release trailers and the final version of the film itself. And on top of just pointing out differences that we'll notice, I'm even going to mention hints at what could have been a completely different climax to the film itself. So all of that and more is coming up, so stay tuned. In the first entry of a new series of standalone Star Wars films, Rogue One tells the story of how the Rebel Alliance captures and seizes hold of the infamous Death Star plans that are featured so heavily in A New Hope, taking place very shortly before the original 1977 film. Now, this isn't something that's at all new in the world of Hollywood. In fact, the majority of major motion pictures that are released every year will have things that appear in early promotional material like trailers that don't actually end up in the final version of the film. Now, oftentimes this is due to things such as late reshoots in the filming schedule, they could be late story changes even throughout development, or it could even be something as simple as just creative editing, and maybe a scene just isn't flowing with the rest of the film the way they intended, and so things have to be removed at the last minute. And so as we go through this video, we're just going to talk about some of these differences, some things that were present, whether they were visual shots or audio pieces of dialogue that were featured in the three original trailers for Rogue One that were absent in the final film. Now, before we get into this, I want to throw out a full disclosure. One, this is in no way to criticize an amazing film like Rogue One. I really don't think there's much they could have done better when making this film, so this is not a negative video whatsoever. I'm also going to throw out a full disclosure spoiler warning. Throughout this video, I'm going to be mentioning things throughout the film in its entirety, but particularly the end of the film, as this is where we saw some of the major changes. So if you've not seen this film for yourself, you have been warned. Now let's get straight into some of the visual aspects of these trailers that were noticeably absent. Now, through the very first teaser trailer that was released back in April, we see a number of different visual and audio changes. In fact, I believe there's more in this teaser trailer that didn't appear in the final film than did. The very first shot itself of Jyn Erso walking through a rebel hallway is not in the film. We can see shots of Death Troopers raiding and destroying the Erso homestead at the beginning of the film, this particular shot not seen. We have an amazing shot of director Orson Krennic on the beaches of Scarif actually walking through the water itself, and his long white cape actually dragging through the water as he walks up to wreckage of what appears to be the Rebel U-Wing. Again, very different from anything we see in the film. We never actually see him leave the Imperial Citadel while he spends his time on the planet. There is even a shot of Imperial stormtroopers walking Rebel pilots in their orange jumpsuits through the streets of Jedha in prisoner cuffs. There's also a shot showing Jyn Erso and Captain Cassian Andor in the pilot and co-pilot seats of the U-Wing gunship. Yet, in the film, we never actually see Jyn Erso take the pilot-co-pilot seat alongside Cassian. Instead, it is actually always K2 in the pilot seat. An iconic shot at the end of the film showcases Jyn Erso walking on a narrow catwalk high up in the sky, as she walks toward a computer terminal of sorts at the end of the walkway. And as on her way to it, she sees an entire Imperial TIE fighter hover above and face directly toward her as if ready to fire. And while this shot technically is in the final cut of the film, we do see Jyn Erso on this catwalk walking toward this control panel. The TIE fighter is not in the final cut of the film. And probably one of the most memorable moments, our first look at Darth Vader in Rogue One. It is kind of interesting that this iconic shot of him from the backside is one that was never featured. In fact, we never even see him in some type of a setting where this could have taken place. And then finally, the infamous shot of the illuminated tunnel coming to life and showing Jyn Erso in an Imperial costume. So now that we've discussed some of the visual shots of these trailers, let's get into some of the audio parts of these trailers, lines of dialogue that did not make the cut. Now, some of the biggest changes I noticed throughout all three of these trailers is that in the scene of the rebel briefing in the conference room toward the beginning of the film. Now, this is the scene when Jyn Erso is first put into contact with the Rebel Alliance, and Mon Mothma and Admiral Draven. And as we can see throughout all of these trailers, there are numerous shots and pieces of dialogue that did not make the film. We have the very beginning of the teaser trailer with Draven asking, "State your name for the record," in which she replies, "Jyn Erso." We have Mon Mothma's speech about how a major weapons test is imminent and we need you to find out what it is. We have Draven's line of, "Can you be trusted without your shackles?" Jyn replying, "Let's get this over with, shall we?" And Draven's line of, "Is that clear?" to which Jyn replies, "Yes, sir." Now, one of the biggest shocks to me that was not ever in the film in relationship to this scene is Jyn Erso's famous line, "This is a rebellion, isn't it? I rebel." We saw it used in much of the promotional campaign, including recent TV spots shortly before the film's release. Even so, going as far as to show that there were alternate takes of this scene as shown in different TV spots. And yet ultimately, this very famous line did not make the final cut. Now, one of the other big changes I noticed as far as condensing of a scene has to do with Forrest Whitaker's character of Saw Gerrera. Now, throughout the first teaser, we see him with his very famous dialogue at the end, "What will you do when they catch you?" and "What will you become?" Even then, continuing on into the later trailers, we see him talking about things like, "The world is coming undone." Again, showing that this initial briefing and meeting of Saw Gerrera and Jyn Erso must have been a lot longer at one time. Now, something a little bit sad that didn't make the final cut is that of more lines from K2SO. One, approaching Jyn Erso possibly for one of the first times, he says, "The captain says you are a friend. I will not kill you." And then later in that same trailer, he mentions that there is a 97.6% chance of failure, to which Cassian tries to cover up by saying he means well. Another thing I thought was really interesting that was omitted from the final cut is in the second official trailer, where we have director Orson Krennic talking and using the very famous line we now know, "The power we are dealing with here is immeasurable." And it appears in this trailer that he is actually speaking to Darth Vader at the time, which is interesting because we only see Vader and Krennic in the same scene communicating once throughout the film, and that scene was not in the same setting as this dialogue takes place. So there you have it, just a handful of different audio and visual points that were featured in these three trailers that did not make the ultimate cut of the film. And again, as you can see, none of these were major things, nor do they take away from the film in any way by not being there, even if some of the dialogue lines were really cool and some of the shots amazing. But now we're going to mention a few things featured in the original teaser trailer that actually could have had a significant difference on the ending of the film. Now, in the first teaser trailer, there is a shot of Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, and K2SO running through the Imperial Citadel on Scarif. And if you pay attention to Jyn Erso's hand, she is holding the Imperial data tape, the Death Star plans. Now, in the final version of the film, once Jyn and Cassian rescue and retrieve the Death Star plans, they're forced to go onto the top of this citadel and use the giant satellite dish on top to transmit digitally the plans to the Rebel fleet above. However, looking at these shots, which then follows up with one of squads of stormtroopers chasing after them, imply that they may have had to deliver the Rebel plans in person in an original version of the film. Then, at the end of this teaser trailer, we have the iconic shot of rebels running through the beaches toward a group of Imperial walkers that are firing down upon them. And if you notice closely in this shot, we can see that this is still Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor running, Jyn still holding the Imperial data tapes. Again, hinting that the original ending of this film may have had them actually in a giant escape with a physical copy of them trying to get to a Rebel escort U-Wing possibly. Now, something I do think is interesting is when you play Star Wars Battlefront's DLC pack, Rogue One Scarif, the new game mode introduced in this game called Infiltration actually sets up a very similar circumstance that we see hinted at in these teasers. The third and final game mode phase is that of actually having to run with the data tape to a U-Wing escort. And now, I didn't think that much into it personally, even because you look at other game modes such as Battle Station released for the Death Star, and how it is similar to the way it pans out in A New Hope, but by no means a direct recreation of it, that I thought maybe this was just their way of doing creative freedom to prevent any spoilers of the ending of the film. However, when studying these teasers now, it almost makes you wonder if maybe this wasn't inspired by the original ending to the film. And again, I am sure that if you really studied these trailers side by side with the final cut of the film, you would see that there are many, many small differences throughout them. This is a video just showcasing some of the major omissions. So again, thank you so much for watching this video. If you found out anything else interesting, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear about it. And until next time, may the Force be with you, always.